Good evening, everybody. It is 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chambers. It is September 16th, 2024, and I'm calling to order a meeting of the Human Affairs Committee. Let's start the meeting by making a roll call, taking a roll call attendance.
Alderman Thibodeau.
Here.
Alderman Tim Sennett is here. Alderwoman at Large Gloria Timmons. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly, Vice Chair. And Alderman Thomas Lopez, Chair.
I am here.
We have 3 in attendance.
I was advised by Alderman Timmons that she would be on vacation, so I knew that she would be absent. We've done our roll call. Let's just move to public comment. Any members of the public wishing to come and make public comment, we have 3 minutes. Please try to stay within it. Please state your name and address for the record.
We just come?
Yep.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Spirasavet of 39 Coburn Avenue. I serve as rabbi for Temple Beth Abraham. I was on the Imagine Nashua Committee and feel continuing responsibility for its values. I am on the State Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education and am past president of the Nashua Area Interfaith Council. I name those to up my personal accountability. How do I not make things worse tonight, talking about our 24075? Speaking in opposition to a resolution, but with a hand stretched out to the Palestinian community here and in solidarity with my own hurting people. Please, fellow Nashuans, accept my words with grace as just topic headings for further conversation. I'm going to speak a lot faster than my heart wants to and my community deserves because I haven't split this message up with anybody else here to speak with me. I've been for 36 years a proponent of Palestinian dignity and self-determination, and I'm still today. My rabbis in Jerusalem taught me during the year the First Intifada began that this is part of the meaning of Torah and our Exodus story and religious Zionism. I know supporters of the resolution are trying to save lives. I am listening, even to meetings I haven't attended. I'm not trying to speak over or past anyone. I know my frame won't make sense to everyone who is behind me. As alder people, your first responsibility is to us, the people of this city. This resolution and how it's handled here are much more consequential here than any effect it will have in Israel-Palestine. Instead of making one traumatized community feel less welcome here than another traumatized community, how do you help make it so that we all feel like precious parts of this civic and moral community? It's not the resolution itself so much, but the talk around it already and what would follow. Whether, for instance, Israelis, some half the world's Jews, are being lumped all together as war criminals, including my cousins and friends and their kids and the many ethical heroes I know there. I know this is not Alderman Lopez's intention, absolutely not at all. You may not all know what it's been like for Jews here. We still grieve daily for so many people we know by name, our families, or at most a couple degrees of separation. October 7th was not just a single day. The suffering, the deaths, the hostages, they go on. It's not just about the Holocaust either, but right now. You may not realize how the conflict has pressed on even my strong relationships with people, allies, in public work here, people I admire. You may not know about all the introspection going on among Jews in Israel and here, quietly and in mass demonstrations. All this is part of what's at stake here, and I just ask people to add it to our important and imperative awareness of Palestinians and their important realities. How can we here invest in peace and coexistence there, using our local strengths and resources, lift up the peacemakers and ethical heroes many of us know in the Holy Land who need our moral support, our megaphone, and our tangible investment?
Time.
May I say one more brief bit? I just want to say, don't vote yes, I ask, but also don't just vote no and ignore this matter. And I want to appreciate, Alderman Lopez, what you have modeled in your spoken words the past few meetings, acknowledging all of us affected while speaking your own perspective on the war. Thank you.
Other individuals wishing for public comment?
My name is Eleanor Schwartz. I live at 46 Concord Street. I'm going to read the words of a video clip issued by the Israeli Defense Forces on September 4th. We received a clear intelligence indication regarding a tunnel shaft in this area. We operated precisely in this location to dismantle the infrastructure and uncover the tunnel. As you can see, this tunnel was hidden in a child's bedroom, a place for a child to be safe and not used as a human shield for Hamas. This is exactly what Hamas does. They hide behind the civilian population, putting them at risk. From this tunnel, we rescued the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages: Eden, Ori, Carmel, Almog, Hirsch, and Alexander. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Bradley Conway from Manchester. With our Gaza human rights or universal human rights resolution going through committee now, we have to ask ourselves, what will our role in this conflict be? Will we censor this conversation and hide behind the truth to save face for those federal leaders who perpetuate this genocide? Getting the language just right here is really important because, from my perspective, the function of this resolution is symbolic. Its strength lies in how strong our solidarity with Palestine and our love for humanity shines through. I think it already does a really great job, so I'll just talk about some language issues. So thank you so much, Alderman Tom, for adding the language that makes it sound like the resolution, makes the timeline start on October 7th. Thank you very much for adding some language in there. About that. I do have a morbid edit to make. I think the number of dead should be updated from 34,000 to 40,000. That's 6,000 people. 6,000 people have died since we started writing this resolution, at least. Regarding the intro paragraph for the resolution, the second paragraph describing the resolution, the second paragraph says that the resolution calls for more military and humanitarian aid to Gaza, and I was wondering if that's a typo, but then I think maybe it isn't. I believe it should just say continued humanitarian aid to Gaza. Advocating for continued military aid may seem like a good middle ground to get more much-needed humanitarian aid into Gaza, but it's really just advocating for more of the same failed U.S. policy that enables Israel's illegal military activity. This year, the U.S. Navy built a temporary floating pier, which the U.S. Navy assembled. It cost $290 million. It lasted 20 days, and it did not bring in nearly enough aid, only 9,000 tons. It did, however, succeed in making Israel's continued military operation more palatable to Americans instead of doing what our resolution suggests, which is leveraging American military aid to apply pressure and stop the collective punishment of everyone in the Gaza Strip. It was mentioned by the Board of Aldermen. Oh, I'm not going to read that paragraph. Maybe it's a little late, but I do want to take issue with the whereas clause where the resolution, it talks about the Israeli dead, and there's a line in there about how their remains were desecrated, where I do think this language was meant to round out the resolution and make it more palatable to residents in Nashua. I think the language is
30 seconds.
Fairly counterproductive. First, I don't know what it's referring to, and it kind of feels like it's playing into the existing bias that Americans have been conditioned to feel towards Arab men. It's part of the line of logic that says they're animals. They don't have respect for the dead. They're uncivilized. They deserve this, etc. Meanwhile, Israel's permitted to continue desecrating the very alive and sentient bodies of Palestinians who, by depriving them of food and clean water, healthcare, etc., then bombing them on a massive and unprecedented scale. You really don't hear a lot of the media about that. Feel free to ask us questions. Call us up if you need us. Thank you.
My name's Fred T-Boom. I don't normally appear before this committee, but this time I will. I'd like to, and I expect that someone will move to retitle and replace the meaningless dribble of R 2475 in its entirety with the following. Recognizing that the terrorist Hamas organization be vanished from the earth. Whereas, since its founding in the late 1980s, Hamas has been promoting rhetoric and policies aimed at destroying the Jewish state of Israel and killing Jews in Israel around the world. Whereas on October 27, 2023, Hamas terrorists sneak attacked Israel, slaughtered, raped, and tortured around 1,200 men, women, and children, and infants in the largest and most brutal massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Whereas Hamas terrorists kidnapped 251 innocent victims, including children, women, and the elderly. Whereas Hamas retreated into a network of tunnels beneath the homes, schools, and hospitals of Gaza, using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Hamas acknowledges its terrorism, denounces its pledge to kill all Israelis, and immediately agree to an unconditional ceasefire. Be it further resolved that Hamas immediately denounce its governments over the Gaza Strip and not participate in renewed election. Be it further resolved that any consideration of a two-state solution be abandoned in favor of a one-state solution, namely the State of Israel. Be it further resolved that the West Bank, being part of the ancient Israel under King Saul, David, and Solomon, be immediately annexed in its entirety into Israel. And be it further resolved that all Palestinians who now live in the Gaza Strip be expatriated to Egypt and Lebanon and all such Arab states who will accept them.
30 seconds.
I have made copies. There's only 3 of you here. I'd like these to be read into the record if someone here wants to accept.
Thibodeau, do you want to go?
I'll pick this up. And I also took some effort to prepare a map you've never seen before. It took me some time to prepare this map. Don't sit down, I'm going to hand this out.
Time.
And this shows that the West Bank, in its entirety, was part of the ancient Israel and Judah under Kings Saul, David, and Solomon. And I overlaid the ancient Israel map of Judah and Israel on top of the current modern Israel. So you see that the West Bank is part of Israel. Thank you.
Mr. T-Boom, just a point of order. You have spoken before the board a few times. Your address is 24 Cheyenne Drive?
24 Cheyenne Drive, Nashua, New Hampshire, 03062.
I have it memorized, so I'm sure the transcribers do, but I figured
It's
I'd just
okay.
double
Just
check.
make the map and my remarks part of the minutes, please.
Yep.
Hello again, board. My name is Nick Scalera, 2 Paddington Place here in Nashua. I'm here again to compel you all, as the Human Affairs Committee, to pass the ceasefire resolution as it has been put forward by Alderman Lopez. Last week, I asked members of this full board to illuminate their concerns about this resolution as it pertained to its wording. No one took the time to enumerate those concerns, so it should be fair to say that those on the board who are opposed to this resolution are not opposed to it on the grounds of its rhetoric, but rather its merits. And to that end, I find it very hard to believe that anyone here can make a persuasive argument as to why we as a city cannot pass a resolution such as this one. There's nothing in this resolution that would put Nashua at odds with the state of New Hampshire, or even at odds with the federal government. This resolution is calling on the federal government to follow its own laws, namely the Leahy Law, when it comes to human rights, crimes against humanity, and weapons transfers. I also want to point out why I believe the amending of this resolution to the final paragraph, as had been suggested in the full board meeting, would be a slap in the face to everyone who has fought for this resolution, as well as to the people of Gaza. For months, we have come to this board to recognize the harm that our country is adding to this inhumane situation. By simply limiting our response to, quote, expressing sincere solidarity, we are obfuscating the truth that is shown in the rest of the body of this resolution. Solidarity cannot simply be passive. Solidarity means standing against the oppressive forces at work, even if they are coming from a place that is uncomfortable to reckon with. Whether we as a city want to fully acknowledge it or not, there is work being done in this city that is helping facilitate the death and destruction abroad. Nearly 1 in 10 residents in Nashua work for or in conjunction with BAE Systems. Now, do I believe that all of these people are bloodthirsty warmongers? No. Insinuating as such would be silly and simply counterfactual. What is accurate, however, is that Nashua is certainly complicit in this genocide to an extent. The parent who has to witness their child being quite literally evaporated by a 2,000-pound Mark 84 JDAM does not have the luxury to recognize the separation of civil work in the military-industrial complex. Our federal government has erased any possibility of that distinction being made due to its insistence on continuing a genocide that is being live-streamed across the globe. This resolution is the only way Nashua, in the annals of history, can redeem ourselves and clear our conscience of the horrors abroad. It is for that reason that I implore you all as a committee to pass this resolution back to the Board of Aldermen and then do everything in your power to see that it is passed there as well. Thank you.
Any further public comment? Seeing none, we move to discussion.
The Process Recovery Center.
Do we have a representative from the Process Recovery here? Yes. I also wanted to invite Jordan Duran. He also works with the recovery program. I was thinking that the Process Recovery could do a presentation and the two of you could sit and we could have some discussion on how the city can support such things.
I'd be happy to join. Good to see you.
Would you prefer to just have a seat and speak from a mic, or?
You want me to sit there?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Likewise, Jordan, if you'd like to join us. Yeah, okay, good. Sometimes when I do tricky things, I'm not sure everybody's on the same page. I should have briefed everybody ahead of time. Okay, so if you want to introduce yourself and what the Process Recovery does to start.
Do I need to push this, or can everybody hear me?
No, you just have to speak, that's all.
All right. My name is Adam Aquazap. I work at the Process Recovery Center here in Nashua, New Hampshire on 21 Factory Street. We are a PHP and IOP outpatient program, which deals in the substance abuse of a lot of our residents here in Nashua, abroad, New Hampshire, as well as many states in surrounding New England.
Before anybody gets confused, PHP is partial hospitalization.
Yes, it is.
IOP is intensive outpatient.
That is correct.
Those are two different degrees of care before inpatient hospitalization.
Yep, absolutely. So we are the natural next step after what is a 3.5 residential level of care, and before that, a 4.0 or a 3.5 medication management 3.5 level as well. So what we do is we are working diligently to assess and help individuals that are struggling with substance abuse and mental health illnesses essentially reintegrate back into society. We have done an amazing job building up the curriculum to make sure that they are being treated at all levels, and our business development portion has done a great job as building up the relationships with individuals such as Jordan over at Doorway, as well as other hospitals, other mental health facilities such as Greater Nashua Mental Health, to make sure that our clients get as much well-rounded care as they can possibly receive before hopefully moving into long-term sober living, which we hold 24 houses here in New Hampshire, in Nashua, New Hampshire, and at that point they are pretty much on their own outside of the fact that they are still held to dealing with their own recovery, whether that's working with our long-term recovery coach track, a mental health IOP and a substance abuse IOP. They are required to attend X amount of meetings throughout the community here each day, each week. They are required to have a job and hold a job and be paying rent, with the hopes that they are building up the recovery capital, if you will, to go out in the community and be a productive member of society once again.
Okay. And just for some context, as members of the Human Affairs Committee, as the chair, it's important for us to invite organizations that are actively working to address human needs in the city. Particularly as the weather gets colder, we become increasingly aware and refocused on people who are unsheltered, people who are struggling and at risk for housing stability. And particularly, I think one of the quiet parts that just needs to be said much louder is the opioid crisis and the substance misuse crisis underneath it never really disappeared. It may have been softened somewhat or diffused a little bit because of COVID, but a lot of people are struggling with recovery. And through the process of our city's efforts to organize Safe Station and increased visibility here and collaboration, we've seen a lot of programs develop and organize and collaborate. So it's important for my fellow aldermen and the public to know that these programs are operating, to know what their scope is when people ask, you know, what can be expected of this or that. So it is helpful. Does the process, do you take walk-ins? Do you have a crisis line? What hours are you operational?
So we are technically operational from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, but we do have a 24-hour line that can be called via Google. That will ring to me and 4 other of our marketing agents or business development officers that we have on staff, and that will ring 24/7. So we are reachable 24/7, but hours of technical business hours would be 8 to 5, Monday through Friday.
And that would be more for informational about intake or recovery programs, enrollment, not necessarily like substance use recovery stabilization?
I would say you could definitely get both. One thing that my predecessors really instilled in me that I have since passed on to the rest of our team is we will answer and field any call. Whether you end up at our program or not, the best thing that we can do for you is to find you the services and make the necessary calls and do the footwork that you may be unable to do in a timely manner and make sure that your problems are addressed as quickly as possible.
I think from what I've seen and the whole value of the Safe Station program when it was initially conceived is having a person to talk to when you need to talk to them and having them give you in-person guidance is so much more valuable than a pamphlet, a brochure. We open at 9 a.m., that kind of stuff. So I think it's a very important piece. Before committee members ask questions, I wanted Mr. Duran to introduce himself and identify his current role because I've known Jordan in the community in many roles, and he has a lot of experience to bring, but keeping track of where he is, you know, now is always its own thing. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me. Totally caught me off guard. Did not expect this at all, but thank you. I'm grateful. Adam doesn't know that I recently switched positions. So a little bit about me. My name is Jordan Duran. I live in Nashua, New Hampshire. Been back in Nashua for about 4 or 5 months now. I was working with the Nashua Doorway up to about maybe a month and a half ago. Prior to that was with Granite Pathways, both contracts. They had the Manchester and Nashua. And then it started in Manchester with the whole Safe Station thing with Serenity Place. I worked with Tom Lopez in the past. Actually, I was a resident at the Nashua Soup Kitchen and Shelter where Tom was my case manager, and I became his colleague, and then I went back to being a resident. So I have experience with being a professional in relapsing. Now I work for a program called Clearbrook and Banyan Treatment Centers located in Baldwinville, Mass., about an hour southwest from here. And we have numerous of things going on, medical detox. We got the SUD inpatient residential. We also have the residential mental health, and we have a first responders program. EMS, police, fire department, state police, correction officers, nurses, social workers would be housed Cottage 3, totally separate from the civilian population, obviously based on the clinical assessment and whatnot, but we have numerous things going on. So looking forward to connecting with Adam and collaborate. I just want to provide options and resources to the city of Nashua, because Nashua is my city. I live here, and to be where I'm at today, I never would have thought in a million years I'd be doing this in this setting. I used to cause I've caused harm. I've sold drugs, I've done drugs, and I was part of the problem. Now I'm trying to be part of the solution. Thank you, Tom.
It is very important for people who've been through the experience to be able to speak about it when needed, because oftentimes I think the general public doesn't see any hope. They don't think these problems can be solved, but I can testify personally that many people who are very instrumental leaders and organizers in Nashua have caused trouble, have caused harm, have done their share, and have moved past it and found recovery. So while I know that when I see people who are living in campsites, when I see people who are staying in shelters or looking for somewhere to be during, the day, I know with the right supports, they can find that path and they can give back to the community. It really helps to see people who are actually able to articulate that personally. I was also particularly interested in your program, and I thought my fellow aldermen might want to know about it, because we talk a lot about the stresses and the burnout that our first responders face. And to have a program that actually provides the actual supports that they need is huge, and it's practically on our doorstep. So making sure that we know that there are focused recovery support programs for first responders nearby is huge. And I think Adam might also agree that any inpatient treatment programs that have any capacity at all is something that any social worker would want to know about, because it's never one place that you're going to work with and send the person to in the middle of the night. If you have a list of 4 or 5 regular partners, though, you can usually find something for someone in very short order, as long as you maintain those connections and those networks. So I think it's very important for both of you to kind of present your programs and your perspectives on the problems. I want to open it up to my fellow aldermen and see what they have. Alderman Senate?
I don't have much in the way of questions. Thank you for being here tonight, by the way. I always look forward to the opportunity to hear what resources are available in the community. And Jordan, your story in particular is very inspiring. A couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to take in a screening, of a film called The 50, which actually documented a program in California that is very similar to yours. Folks who found themselves in the penal system as a result of some of these determinants of mental health, in particular addiction, and turn their lives around and refocus their energies back on helping to solve that problem. And it's a massive problem. And so to have you here with that firsthand knowledge is, I think, a great asset to the community. I'm glad to have you here in Nashua presenting tonight. I just also want to note my appreciation for the opportunity for that 24/7 contact that you had. I thought the Safe Stations program in its peak was one of the best resources that we had put together here in the community. And for that to go away, knowing how instrumental those 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. hours are in some folks' lives and their journeys to recovery is it was terrible to see that go away. So to have even a microcosm of something similar to that is very beneficial. So thank you all for what you're doing, and please keep up the good work, and by all means reach out if there's anything that we can do to support you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Alderman Thibodeau, any comments, questions?
Yeah, thank you for being, unfortunately, I probably have questions, I don't have any at the moment, but I definitely appreciate your story and appreciate what you guys came in here to tell us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do think there's a couple of donut holes in our comprehensive approach to trying to help people who are unhoused. And one of the most famous ones is, if you're kicked out on a Friday, there is not really any kind of shelter support or intake mechanism until Monday morning. The coordinated entry line isn't manned 24/7. And I think particularly people who might be kicked out of or exited from any recovery programs, it's not going to help them to be unsheltered and unaware of what they're, like, uncertain about their future for 3 days before, Monday morning, and everybody comes back to work and is there to help and tell them, that there's support available. So to Alderman Sennett's point, it's huge to be able to at least talk to somebody who is understanding and might be able to point people in a direction of emergency supports, because that moment where you don't know where you're going to be at that night, that is a crisis, that is an emergency. And then you add on to that any kind of mental health or addiction issues, and it's a disaster waiting to happen.
I agree.
I want to make sure that both of you are able to present any information and how to connect with your programs if needed. So if you don't mind, if either of you want to send literature or material, I can submit it I can either submit it as a communication to the Board of Aldermen, or I can accept it at our next meeting's minutes, just to make sure that where people might see you on TV and say, oh, you know what, I want to know more about the process of recovery or how to support them.
Of course.
There's a way for them to do that.
Absolutely. I can absolutely provide you pretty much whatever you need. We are currently in the process of building out our digital literature. We've had quite a few changes to our website, so that's a little bit quote-unquote under construction right now. But I'd be happy to drop off any brochures or just provide you with any information that I've said here again, and I'd be appreciated if you were to send it out to everybody and put our name out there, because at the end of the day, like you said, just Friday night, not having anywhere to go, it does become a crisis, one that I've lived in my hometown of Laconia, and luckily Nashua has a much better and more ready to help embodiment of people that Laconia is graciously catching up to in recent years, which is nice to see. But living that back in 2016, 2017, and not knowing where the next piece of shelter was during my brief stint of homelessness before I engaged in treatment in 2017 was something that I would have liked to have had a safe station to have, called or walked into, or just any sort of resources that are available now that weren't then. So I do want to point out that there has been some progress made, but obviously we're all seeing that it isn't quite enough just yet.
That culture that you referenced is something that Nashua is proud of, but it's something we have to fight to maintain, because it's very easy for people to get discouraged or overwhelmed or feel like there's never going to be a change and this is always going to be the solution, to point fingers, at the mayor's office or the alderman for not legislating correctly. But the reality is we are proud of that culture, and it's the only way to keep Nashua a thriving #1 place to live. And as much as, we have to advocate that this is who we need to be, we also need to show people how to be that. And that's where I think both of you have shown programs that it's important for people to know that these problems aren't being faced alone. And I don't just mean the individual who's struggling with addiction. I also mean the community around him that wonders whether or not any positive change is possible.
Absolutely.
So I very much appreciate that. Mr. Duran, is there anything that you'd want to say or identify?
No.
Website, maybe?
Yeah, brochures, marketing, everything's on my phone, so you can just send me an email and I can just shoot it over.
All right, well, thank you, both of you, for coming up. We definitely appreciate that perspective. Feel free to follow the committee as well. We will have other organizations and groups presenting, partly so that the public knows, that these organizations are active, partly because our own public health department is doing a tremendous amount of work to try to coordinate resources and organize community leadership. And then also because as aldermen, we're often approached by people who struggle or don't know where to go or what to do. So it helps to be able to point at people who have more specific knowledge in those areas.
Absolutely. Well,
So
we
thank
thank
you
you
very
for
much.
helping to bridge the gap between the community, because at the end of the day, without the communication of all the community partners, things tend to slip through the cracks. So it is important that we, stay united on a front that is
Absolutely.
trying its best to get better. And there are a lot
Make
of
sure
people
don't slip
fighting.
through the cracks.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lopez.
Next up on our order of business, we have communications.
There are none.
Actually, there's this resolution and map that we've received.
Do you want to suspend the rules to accept that?
Yes, because it was received, so I want to make sure the public can see all of this.
All right, I will make a motion to suspend the rules to accept communications provided by a member of the public after the agenda was prepared.
All right. Any discussion? I think the need is self-evident. All those in favor say aye.
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 And that motion carries. Let's make sure the city clerk has a copy to attach to
Yeah,
this.
I've got the copies here.
Unfinished business?
There's none.
New business resolutions.
Before us is R 24-083, relative to the acceptance of $60,715 from the State of New Hampshire Department of Safety 2023 State Homeland Security Grant Program into Fire Grant Activity Hazmat Refresher Class. I'd like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
Okay, we heard the motion. Do we have someone to present on the hazmat class?
Good evening, Steve Buxton, Nashua Fire Chief. This money will be utilized for our hazardous materials team refresher program. It's an annual program, and we usually achieve the funding for this training through this grant process.
Seems pretty self-explanatory. We've had this multiple years. Is there a match? Is there a contribution?
There is no match from the city on this one.
So we receive money and then we use it to train our personnel.
Correct.
All right. Any questions by the members of the committee? Nice and straightforward. Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. We will recommend final passage.
Next up is R24-085, relative to the acceptance of $144,610 from the United States Department of Energy into Community Development Grant Activity FY25 Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant EECBG. I will make a motion to recommend final passage.
All right, and we have our department chair director. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good evening, Deb Chisholm, Sustainability Department Manager. This is funding that the city is a direct recipient of from the U.S. Department of Energy through the bipartisan infrastructure law. We have submitted all of our paperwork to the Department of Energy, have not heard back yet from them, but it was really, the requirement was simply to put together a work plan and an estimate on how we anticipated to spend the funding. We're looking to spend about 2/3 of the funding on public electric vehicle charging stations adjacent to the Elm Street parking garage. And the rest of the monies will be used to help support converting the city's municipal fleet of passenger and light-duty vehicles to electric by installing electric vehicle charging stations on municipal buildings.
When you say adjacent to, do you mean like in the areas facing like Joanne's Kitchen and Surf, or do you mean?
Correct. We'll be, essentially at this point, we're looking at putting them right on Garden Street on this end closer to City Hall.
So the spaces that are constantly occupied by tour buses won't be the ones that are electric charging
We
stations?
will be staying out of the way of the tour buses, and we will be trying to sort of rejigger the way the spaces are painted in the section that's closest to City Hall. We have a couple of handicap spaces there, and we also have spaces that are used by the transit folks when they're swapping drivers in and out that need to be slightly larger than they are at this point, a little bit wider. So,
I know that the ones that you described on municipal property for municipal use, that's one population. Is the ones that would be in the public parking, is that meant for public use?
correct. Those would be, you would need to actually pay to use those chargers.
Is there any concern that that area, that street, Garden Street, you can't really go two ways on it? If you go towards the bus loop, you're entering the area that's reserved for bus use only? Because I'd hate to see, I mean, basically everybody who parks here would have to know they have to go the other way.
I guess they're going to figure that out pretty quick if there is some signage down there that does direct you where to go. And it does, you're right, it does get busy when the buses are in that area, but hopefully.
Okay, I think I'm indulging my own curiosity here. That probably will go to before like infrastructure committee. This is just for accepting the grant. I think. You're right. Okay. Any other members of the committee have questions? Funding sources, allocations, matches, anything? All right. Seeing none. Motion is to recommend final passage. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion carries. New business ordinances.
There is none.
Tabled in committee.
I will make a motion to remove from the table R24-075.
So my thought is to have some discussion about removing it before we fully remove it.
Yes.
For context, members of the public who might be tuning into this particular meeting or in the audience who don't know, this is the resolution that I authored entitled the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, recognizing the the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and urging the responsible and moral oversight of and accountability for military equipment used by international allies. So this followed multiple months of public comment and advocacy by a group of citizens that were calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, that were calling for a full divestment of military resources supported by the city of Nashua, and the corresponding concern on the part of other aldermen that this seemed like it was what was being called for was outside of our role as aldermen. Some of it wasn't necessarily feasible, and particularly it is a very divisive international issue. There's a lot of people that are being hurt and dying, and there's a lot of people who have connections to those people. So my intention was not to stir the pot. It was to give people who were making public comment and felt very strongly about an issue they were affected by a mechanism for being heard and to feel like they were being heard. So I met with them repeatedly. I tried to meet with other members of different viewpoints to try to come up with something that represented some common ground. And I tried to represent the city of Nashua's role accurately. So to that end, the reason that it recognizes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an acknowledgement that there is an international body I identified as being more appropriate for navigating international affairs and issues, especially where two parties have such history and such an entanglement of lost loved ones and injuries and generational strife that there needs to be, in my opinion, a third party to intervene. I also identified that there are federal delegations and representatives here as opposed to locally elected aldermen, like I'm elected to represent the Tree Streets and Ward 4, not the United States ceasefire initiatives. So to that end, I recognize that there are senators and there are congressmen and there are, executive branch presidential officials that we do elect, and that those are people that we should acknowledge are responsible for navigating the way our public funding as used at the federal level and our international policy is. So this is a 2-page resolution. There's a lot in it, but as I see it, the first chunk of it was a role statement. These are people we should turn to for this. These are people we should turn to for this. These are endemic rights. I also tried to frame the issue, as was pointed out in public comment. I started with the October 7th attack because trying to go into the actual history literally spreads back to the beginning and before recorded history. So was not for me an easy entry point. I don't believe I did a great job of finding one. And as was pointed out, in navigating the legislative process, a number of things have changed. It was mentioned earlier that an increase of military aid was referenced. I was in fact referencing the dock that was being installed, and my understanding at the time that there would be like military support and protection for civilians getting resources, and that is probably no longer a relevant piece of the legislation. More recently, after conceiving of the legislation and having it referred here, we tabled it at our last Human Affairs Committee because we had referred it to the Cultural Connections Committee. They hadn't had a chance to look at it yet. And at the time, shortly before a meeting, we'd had a public announcement that the United States was supporting a ceasefire resolution. So optimistically, I thought maybe some things would change. Since then, I moved to withdraw it from this committee, following the Cultural Connections Committee not having room for it on their agenda at the time. They were focused on Nashua and the Multicultural Festival, and they needed the time for planning. The unfortunate implications of that would have been the next Cultural Connections Committee meeting would have been at the end of September, meaning that it would have been read in the Aldermanic Chamber the day after the anniversary of the October 7th attack, which I thought was unfair to the issue and inconsiderate of the people affected by it. So I put it before the full board. I was willing to kind of go with the will of the board at that point, and it was the will of the board to send it back to this committee for additional fine-tuning. So I think that summarizes where we are tonight. So I want to see what other committee members feel about taking it off the table in the context that if it is going to go back to the full board again, we don't have any significant representation change here at this committee than we had the last time we talked about it. So it might be challenging trying to craft something with enough support to have any other fate than what it just had. Alderman Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I made that motion to send it back here, and I discussed this a little bit at brief with Alderman Thibodeau earlier this afternoon. As you know, at that board, there was a motion for indefinite postponement, which at the bare minimum, I feel does a disservice to this resolution. Unfortunately, that motion failed, and I was hoping for a more robust discussion, which didn't happen, but there seemed to be an appetite to dig into it a little bit more, maybe fine-tune some of the language in the resolution. It was brought up at that meeting, and I've heard a couple times since, and somehow it became attributed to me, the idea of paring it down to the very final statement of the resolution. I'd just like to go on the record saying that was not my idea. I certainly expanded upon the appetite to fine-tune the language, but at no point had I suggested that the final statement be all that we run with. In regard to taking it off the table tonight, we could. There's 3 of us here.
Very easy to get a majority.
Yeah.
But not productive, I don't think.
No, not productive at all, which brings me to my greater point. I mean, we can't kick this down the road forever and hope that members who are not on this committee will join us for the discussion and share their input. I'm not going to utilize that to draw any conclusions on the will of my colleagues. However, at the very least, if we are going to make any sort of sweeping changes to this in regard to what we keep in or what we remove, I personally would prefer the full committee be here, at the very least. We all, in some manner or another, elected to be on this committee. And so I feel that the 5 of us should have a say in that. For the moment, I'll leave my comments there and defer to my colleagues.
I think it's worth pointing out that it was my inference, I think, from our last meeting that that was what your intentions were, and that might have been unfair for me to represent. I think your comments were more to the effect of, I would like the part that has the welcoming, Nashua as a welcoming city. And the last section of the resolution, which I think is the most important part, recognizes that Nashua has many people in it and that we don't support any anti-Semitism, we don't support any anti-Islamic sentiment, we don't want people who have connections with Palestinians to be unfairly targeted. So I think I interpreted what you said as being the last paragraph, but I do also think that there hasn't really been any, this is what should be in it, except for tonight. Former Alderman T-Boom is the first person who's actually offered a substantive amendment other than the individuals that originally approached me with it, as they did present their own draft as well. So I guess maybe over the next couple of weeks, if we could receive some concrete feedback or suggestions over how to amend this, we might have something a little bit more helpful to work with. The feedback that we got from the public was helpful because I think there are some areas that are not accurate any longer. And I think particularly trying to identify the specific dynamics of how this most recent wave of hostilities started, that has proven to be very divisive. And I think largely the public comment that we've received has focused on the international implications of it rather than the experience of Nashuans here. I know Rabbi Spiro Savet did speak that it's very difficult to be in a population experiencing this kind of trauma where you have personal touch and connections. And then some of the speakers, Raja and one of the earlier speakers, I'm trying to blank on his name right now, do have personal connections. They know teachers, they know families, they know people. I don't know how to start and introduce the context of this other than to bring that into it, and it seems like I didn't do a great job of that because that's where everybody's focusing. So if we do look at a future amendment to this, I think I would want to see some way of just focusing on Nashua's strengths and Nashua's positivity, because with respect to the people who call for the ceasefire and want to be sure that the Gaza victims, such as they are heard. You know, the recognition that not everyone in Gaza is a terrorist, not everyone is associated with Hamas. I think that's a fair statement to be made, but at the same time, putting in this resolution sort of assumes that Nashua is open to dialogue in the first place, and I'm not 100% sure that's the case. I think the lack of sponsors and the difficulty that we've had having attendance here suggests that this is actually such a difficult issue that people aren't willing to risk even public comment on it as a general whole. So maybe we do need to start with a statement saying people are safe to express their opinions, and even if they disagree, we respect that they have the right to express their opinions. Alderman Senna.
Thank you. Without diving too far into the resolution itself, just because we are still at the motion simply to remove from the table,
Yeah.
I'll dive out in traffic and at least back you on the fact that, I mean, like you said, we have to start somewhere. And if we're considering this resolution in the grand scheme of how it's come before the Board of Aldermen and, you know, what has galvanized the public to take on this issue and to try to enact change throughout the state and in their communities, then without going too far into the history of this conflict, because as you stated, it dates back well before any of us, I don't think that you really erred in beginning with October 7th. I mean, perhaps some manner of statement, which you might have actually included in here. I feel like I've read this over 1,000 times. But, you know, some sort of a statement acknowledging that, well, actually you did right there, subsequent to decades of conflict on October 7th. I mean, this is how this has come into the zeitgeist of this board and of our community at this moment. These aren't issues that were being brought to the Board of Aldermen prior to this, and so I feel at the bare minimum that's a very fair statement to start off with. Yeah.
It was also pointed out to me that invoking the UN as an entity and pointing to their Declaration of Human Rights, I read the Declaration of Human Rights, and I felt it was pretty thorough, pretty comprehensive, and an international agreement that presumably all of the signers and signatories were adhering to. So that was why I pointed to that. It has been since brought to my attention through a number of avenues that the UN is not a perfect institution, but as a municipality identifying the UN at all, I felt like I needed to explain why I was doing that. And so I was trying to put in the context that there's a point where two sides are not going to see eye to eye. They can't necessarily negotiate anything in order to provide mutual security when they're so focused on individual security that it's not visible. So that was why I was putting that context in the first place. But it was also pointed out to me by somebody else as a member of the public that by doing that, I also laser focused this on just this issue. And if I had been a better writer, maybe I could have encompassed other conflicts too. It was really my original intention to say Nashua recognizes that there are international crises and there's collective social trauma that our residents and our community members bring with them. And collectively, we're a stronger community because we are diverse and because we have those different backgrounds. But it also means we have to work to maintain that because we have those different experiences. And that trauma comes with specific areas that are emotionally devastating. So I tried to put a lot in this resolution, and probably too much. That was my intent, and I would say for myself, I am going to have to take another crack at providing an amendment myself, because no one else is coming with one. So if I'm otherwise, we're just going to continue to stay here. So I will give it a stab myself. I'll invite members of the public and other aldermen as well to try to make concrete recommendations for me that I can use to amend. And if ultimately the only feedback I get is don't pass it or let it die, then I trust the will of the aldermen to do that. And if the only feedback I get is keep working on it, then we'll keep working on it. Alderman Thibodeau, we've kind of monopolized the comment. Did you have things that you wanted to say?
I appreciate the effort you put into it. I agree with Alderman Senate that I think October 7th is, if nothing else, at least the most recent timeline that the majority of people associate with the situation. So I think it's perfectly logical that you picked October 7th. Knowing very well that it goes back generationally way before that. I also acknowledge that as members of the community, when there's a situation going on that's so big and you don't know what else to do, you find an avenue to try to help, to do what you can to help. So I do appreciate the people who have been coming here and trying to express their concerns. So by all means, I appreciate it. And I respect their tenacity, if nothing else, for continually coming. I am definitely in no position to help come up with a better wording of this document this evening. I have been opposed to even in taking this on as a task as a Board of Aldermen, as a City of Nashua, to even address the ceasefire resolution, as much as I appreciated the community coming in and talking to us. So the fact that you did, so I applaud you for that, doing what you believe was the right thing to do. But I guess in closing, I am in no position to continue working with the document this evening and coming up with something that would be satisfactory.
I think if I feel ill-equipped to try to tackle this, then maybe having the two members of the committee that are still in their first term might feel a little bit unfair. So I appreciate you guys even diving into this.
Could I ask a question? Maybe, Mr. Chair, you'd be the best suited to answer. If in theory this committee, whether it were the three of us or all five of us, came up with wording, because at least in your comments, Alderman Lopez, I feel like the notion of a resolution that states something marginally different than what the current resolution states had been at least tossed around. If we came up with something so vastly different that it, I would say to anybody of sound mind, really superseded what we would normally refer to as an amendment and really just a complete rewrite and blank slate, would that necessitate withdrawing the current resolution and drafting a new one to submit to legal?
My impression is no, and I would point out that the actual most experienced alderman in the room did suggest erasing the title and the whole thing. So we would want to check that with legal, but I think if there were significant changes to it, that would be part of the discussion and the subsequent will of the board.
All right. The only reason I ask, and I guess I'll throw myself out into traffic again, is because, like I think I've expressed to you, I hope the public recognizes I may have not been the most vocal on this, but I have been taking this under serious consideration. I've been spending significant amount of time reviewing this resolution, reviewing prior resolutions on similar subject matter that the Board of Aldermen has passed in years prior to my coming on. And I have at least what I would consider the very hand-scratched rough draft of something that's more akin to what I had alluded to at the last meeting, which is a reaffirmation of the city's values and expressing them in a manner that relates to international conflict. Whether we want to take that up tonight or you would prefer to sort of punt that to the next meeting, I'll defer to you, Mr. Chair, but.
I am loath to be in suspense for that long. My personal experience pales in comparison to a lot of the other people that are working on this, whether they're leaders of the faith community or community organizers, but I have definitely gotten my fair share of attention for my part in it. But I do think it probably is worth a discussion where the whole board is here.
Yes.
And I think it would be a concrete contribution if we were able to do that. So I would say, at this point, I want to make sure that I'm respecting everybody's time, but I would say we should talk about that at the next meetings as a starting point, and I'll work on my components as well. And maybe with enough pieces that are tangible, maybe we can actually come to something that looks like it would be a legitimate use of the Board of Aldermen's time, and maybe because we have something, we can encourage them to come and participate in the committee.
Yeah, no, I would personally agree with that. And I really feel that if we are at all anticipating the opportunity to get this across the finish line, then I think it's going to ultimately wind up looking like a sum of parts. Mm-hmm. And so I'm happy to share that with you and begin the work that we need to do to see how this ultimately lands at the full board.
It's also important to note that we re-referred this to the committee on Wednesday, which was not a lot of time for the public to even gather its thoughts. And I think likely there were aldermen that have ideas and want to contribute, but it turns out that the next Human Affairs Committee was right around the corner. So with a little bit more notice, maybe we'll get a little bit more participation and engagement. So it sounds like the will is to leave it on the table. All those in favor, well, we already made a motion to
I
remove
put the
it.
motion, but I could just withdraw my motion if you'd like.
Okay, is that accept? Yeah. All right, well, let's just withdraw the motion.
I will withdraw my motion to remove from the table.
All right, so it will remain on the table, and then we will take it up at our next meeting. General discussion. Any general discussion items committee members would like me to start getting people for? Public comment. Any members of the public wishing to comment, please approach, give your name and address, and make your comments. Try to stick within 3 minutes if possible.
Hello again, board. Nick Scalera, still to Paddington Place here in Nashua. It took me a while to collect my thoughts about the comment that happened right before mine, and I would like to request that it gets stricken from the record, seeing as it shouldn't have been allowed to continue in the first place. Section 5 of looking at our charter and ordinances, subsection 5-14, points C and 10, C10 and 11, profane or obscene remarks are prohibited, and the presiding officer has authority to terminate the remarks of any speaker when such remarks do not adhere to this chapter or other applicable law. The person before me openly advocated for ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity, and I think leaving that within the public record would be an atrocity and stain on our city. Moving the entire population of Gaza into the Sinai in Egypt would constitute a genocide in and of itself. The mass relocation of over 2 million people would be a gross crime against humanity. The entire repatriation of the West Bank into the state of Israel not only goes against stated American policy, but international law. I think if the city has any morals whatsoever, we need to strike that from the record. Second of all, it's no secret that the group that has come time and time again advocating for this resolution has been forced to apply by the letter of the law all of the rules of this committee. It's not that I personally have any gripes about it, but the fact that we were more than lenient with speaking times for the people who were opposing this resolution, while we have had countless literal screaming matches here in this chamber about people being allowed to speak at all, I think it really puts on its face how obvious the dichotomy of this is. Furthermore, I'd like to just clarify some of the statements made during the general comment about this resolution. The reason why it's important is, especially when we're talking about the gravity of the situation when compared to other grave international gross human rights abuses, is that, again, we fund this one. I would love, obviously that is a gross misinterpretation of the word love, I would love to see evidence proving the United States funding another gross humanitarian disaster to the extent that we fund this one. We do not fund the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Sudan and the
30
Congo
seconds.
to the tune of over $20 billion just last month. That doesn't happen. It simply is a factual encounter to the truth. If we want to be a truthful effort into this resolution, it needs to stay the way it is, labeling the United States' culpability in this global humanitarian disaster. Thank you.
Further public comments?
Hey again, thanks for having me. Bradley Conway from Manchester. I'm basically up here to say thank you so much for taking this on and taking it seriously again. You guys are doing the thing. You guys are doing such a great job, and I really appreciate. We all really appreciate it. I think a lot of people in Nashua feel so much better that this issue is being taken seriously and being debated, and it's in public. It just means so much. I do want to say I don't think, as was mentioned, I think a few times, I don't think this issue is as complicated as it's being made out to be. This is colonization. This is settler colonialism, and people are being removed from their land. And they shouldn't be. They're indigenous to the land, black and white. And I guess that's the big thing that I wanted to say. Don't turn this into a diversity resolution. Obviously, diversity is really important, but as we were saying, the last clause, we were talking about whittling the resolution down to the last clause, which basically says, we, the people of Nashua, want to send our solidarity, true solidarity, to the people of violence or who have been affected by violence overseas. And I don't think that last sentence that last paragraph could stand on its own as a true statement of solidarity, having withdrawn all the solidarity, the true solidarity language. So I just want to have said that. And thank you so much for your participation in this, and thank you.
Hi again, Jonathan Spiris-Savet, 39 Coburn Avenue, Rabbi. I hesitate because I could just easily communicate this to any of us. I don't love the idea of doing kind of all our communications by the microphone and the 3-minute thing. And I appreciate that Alderman Lopez tried to gather a few of us together, and I presume more than who has, to talk about this in the community. I think this last interchange is really important about the intentions, and I think it will affect certainly how I think about it in terms of which kind of resolution you're working on. So as you think about that, I just really do encourage you to reach out to other members of the not just the committee but the board to get more of us together offline where we're not limited by this format. I think it's really important in terms of primarily holding our community together and allowing us maybe to speak in a way that's a little more back and forth than this format allows us to do.
Any further public comment? Seeing none, remarks by members of the board.
I'm all set.
I will speak because in public comment, it was specifically pointed out that as chair, I have latitude to terminate comment in some areas. I think particularly in that kind of a situation where someone's expressing something that they believe that can be interpreted in such a specific way by many others, it's very important to make sure that that's on the record as a position being stated. I will let the maker of the comments defend his position as he feels needed, and his ideas be presented as they are. because I think that's a very important right that's at the crux of this entire experience. And, you know, what I was trying to do with my resolution is make sure that when people are saying things that could be considered deeply offensive by some of the listeners, that doesn't necessarily mean that their speech should be removed. And it certainly doesn't mean that the record of the speech, at least in my opinion, should be removed either. I think they need to stay on the record. I think I've made enough fumbles and you know, misstatements over the years that have ended up in the record that people have figured out what I was trying to do. I think that's an important part of it. And even if people don't present, you know, ideological unity, or even in some cases ethical or moral unity, subject to the opinion of the listener versus the speaker, it is important to have a record of that dialogue. So that's where I was approaching it as the chair. I'm generally very careful about restricting any speech anyway. And I would point out that there was some exceeding of the 3-minute rule, but I think it was exceeded by multiple parties. And when you really get down to it, the aldermen are always hitting over 3 minutes when they make their comments, so sometimes it's fair. And at the committee meeting, there's 3 of us here, so we can give you the extra 20 seconds to get your thoughts together. So that's my opinion. Those are my comments. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Nay. We are adjourned.
At 8:11.